Hey there, and welcome back to Hearts Wine from Hearts Distractions. I'm your host, Alicia Minor Gaines, and today's topic is one I know we can all relate to, whether we're just starting out in a relationship or have been together for years. We're diving into something that we can truly make or break a relationship. Yes, avoiding accountability. And I know I just recently did an episode on accountability, but this is different. We're diving into a whole different side of accountability here. Why? Because I know we've all been there, right? And maybe you found yourself in a heated argument where, despite everything that's been said, neither partner is willing to step up and admit when they're wrong. It might feel easier to deflect and avoid or blame the other person, but what happens when that becomes a pattern in your relationship? What if I told you that consistently avoiding accountability is one of the biggest threats to your relationship's health? Well, I'm telling you, so make sure y'all listen. In today's episode, we're going to unpack and break down why we avoid accountability, how it impacts our partners and our relationships, how this emotional dynamic can slowly erode trust, and most importantly, how we can start owning our actions to heal and strengthen our bonds. So grab your glass of wine and prepare to drop some wine. You know, those tears that consume us when accountability is lacking in our relationships, that kind of wine. I'm your host, Alicia Minor Gaines, an entrepreneur, licensed marriage and family therapist, wife, mother, author, poet, mixologist, and so much more with over 20 years of experience in the relationship field. I don't know if y'all know, but it is National Poetry Month, and I thought I should shout that out since I am one, and I enjoy writing. And for those of you who don't know or don't remember, yes, I wrote my very own poetry book back in 2018 called Distractions of the Heart. So if you do not have your copy of my book, you can go and check it out on Amazon. It is there. Distractions of the Heart entails a series of collection of poems, yes, relationship-based, but also has a little bit of twist to it for those of you who like to explore on a erotic side of things. So it has a little bit of that in there, as well as, yes, some life lessons around various forms of relationships and relationship experiences. So make sure you grab your copy and check it out and celebrate National Poetry Month with not just a word from yours truly, but also to reflect on some things that need to grow, maybe even in your relationship through those words. So let's break it down. What does accountability even look like in a healthy relationship? First and foremost, it means taking responsibility for your own actions without pointing the finger at your partner. Hear me on this one. It's about saying, made a mistake, or I could have handled that a little better, and then actively working to make things right. Accountability isn't just about admitting when you're wrong. It's also about recognizing how your actions affect the other person. When both partners embrace accountability, there's a sense of shared ownership of the relationship's well-being. That takes trust, emotional strength, and sometimes a lot of humility. Some of us need to humble ourselves. I'm just saying. Here's a scenario that might feel familiar. Y'all know I like to give those, right? So you're in the middle of an argument and it's clear things have gone off track. One person finally admits, yeah, I probably could have said that a little differently and could have handled that better. And the tension starts to ease. That moment of owning up to your part in the issue is the foundation of accountability. It's not about throwing the other person under the bus. It's about recognizing where you could do better and being honest about it. Now, let's talk about the emotional toll of avoiding accountability. Since we broke down what accountability is, imagine this. You're in a relationship, and every time something goes wrong, your partner just deflects, or even worse, refuses to own up to their actions. At first, it might feel like avoiding responsibility is just a temporary fix, right? What does that do to you? And how does it make you feel? Over time, the emotional cost is huge. You begin to feel like your feelings don't matter, or worse, you feel like you're being gaslit or manipulated by your partner. The weight of carrying the emotional burden can feel exhausting. Partners start to become frustrated, and instead of having healthy, productive conversations, you basically get caught in an endless cycle of blame, frustration, and unaddressed conflict. Over time, that frustration grows into resentment. Every time an issue is swept under the rug, I promise you, it chips away at the trust and intimacy between you and your partner. And eventually, the emotional disconnection becomes so deep that even when you're together, it feels like you're miles apart. Think about it. How would you feel if every time something went wrong in the relationship, your partner just shrugged it off and blamed you instead? That frustration, that feeling of being dismissed is where emotional distance begins. And when that distance grows, the relationship starts to crumble. This is why accountability is crucial. It helps clear the air. Clear the air, people. It shows that you're willing to be emotionally vulnerable with each other and not let things fester. When both partners hold themselves accountable, it deepens trust, fosters empathy, and strengthens the emotional bond between you. I promise you, research backs this up, because according to studies from marriage and family therapy, couples who don't take responsibility for their actions experience higher levels of stress and dissatisfaction. They're more likely to see their relationship as one-sided, and that breeds resentment. It's no surprise that resentment is one of the leading causes of relationship breakdowns. How many of y'all experiencing that right now? So, why do we avoid accountability in the first place? Oh, I'm so glad y'all asked. Well, it often comes down to fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, and the fear of being vulnerable. I know some of y'all heard me use that word before and ran all the way left. But when we avoid accountability, we're essentially protecting our ego. We don't want our partners to think less of us, and we certainly don't want to deal with the emotional fallout of confronting difficult truths. I done cursed at somebody right there. We don't want to admit that we're imperfect, and we certainly don't want to face the judgment of our partners. It feels safer to deflect than to risk rejection or judgment. But here's the thing. By avoiding accountability, we're actually sabotaging the trust and intimacy that makes the relationship strong. I'm going to sit here and let y'all think about that one for a minute. But let's take a step back and think about this from a psychological standpoint, shall we? When we're faced with confrontation or conflict, it triggers our fight or flight response. We want to defend ourselves, avoid blame, and protect our sense of self-worth. This is natural, right? Of course it is. But in relationships, if both partners are constantly in defense mode, there's no room for growth or connection. Relationships thrive on honesty and emotional transparency. Ooh, I like that one. I'm going to say that again. Relationships thrive on honesty and emotional transparency. Because if we keep avoiding those tough moments, we're missing out on the growth that comes from navigating those challenges together. And here's the thing. Avoiding accountability often leads to a vicious cycle. You don't admit fault. Your partner gets frustrated, and instead of addressing the issue, both of you retreat into silence or defensiveness. And over time, this emotional wall builds up, and both partners start to feel disconnected. You're ruining your relationship at this point. Okay. So I'm going to hit y'all with some gender role stuff here, right? Because I want to talk about how gender roles and upbringing impact accountability. It's not just about personal choice. There are cultural and societal factors at play that shape how we approach responsibility and relationships. For example, many cultures place high expectations on men to be stoic and strong, therefore not show vulnerability or accepting responsibility, while women are often expected to smooth things over, to be the nurturers and put their needs aside for others. This can create a dynamic where one partner, typically the man, might feel like admitting fault is a sign of weakness, while on the other side, the flip side, women might avoid accountability because they've been conditioned to constantly keep the peace and smooth things over. For fear of upsetting the balance or creating conflict or ruining the male's ego. These ingrained patterns don't just disappear when we enter adulthood. They show up in relationships. For example, if someone has been raised in a family where emotions were repressed or mistakes were never acknowledged, that behavior can carry over into adulthood. If you were taught that apologizing meant you were weak, or that you should always put your partner's needs first, then taking responsibility might feel uncomfortable or even threatening to you. Research from the Journal of Marriage and Family shows that these gendered expectations can lead to severe imbalances in relationships, making it harder for couples to communicate openly and take ownership of their actions. But here's the thing, these societal expectations don't have to define us. It's possible to unlearn these patterns and approach accountability with a new perspective, one where vulnerability isn't a weakness, but a strength. Now, here's where things can get tricky. What happens when one partner completely refuses to be accountable? The dynamic shifts drastically when one person never admits fault or takes responsibility for their actions. It's like trying to carry a heavy load all by yourself while your partner sits by and watches. One partner might start feeling like they're always the one doing the emotional heavy lifting, always the one apologizing, always the one trying to make things right. One partner avoids accountability. The other partner starts to feel unsupported and unappreciated. Over time, this can lead to serious emotional burnout and toxicity. Both partners stop feeling like equals, and that power imbalance can be toxic. When this happens, it's like the relationship becomes one-sided. One person is emotionally invested in solving the problems and maintaining peace, while the other remains passive or dismissive. Over time, this dynamic can weigh heavily on the person who is always stepping up to their own actions. They start to feel undervalued and exhausted from constantly trying to make the relationship work on their own. And honestly, this is where resentment begins to creep in. When accountability is one-sided, it's easy to start feeling like your needs aren't being met. You might even question whether your partner truly cares about the relationship if they aren't willing to take responsibility for their actions. And that's where things can get dangerous. Resentment turns into emotional withdrawal, and when that happens, trust is the first thing to go. Studies suggest that couples in relationships where one partner refuses to be accountable are more likely to face long-term dissatisfaction and emotional disconnection. The lack of responsibility leads to feelings of isolation, and eventually, it can lead to breakup, or even worse, if you're married, a divorce. So, what can you do if you're in this situation? Well, the first step is to identify the issue and start an open conversation about it. But it's not just about talking. It's about taking action together to rebuild the balance of accountability in the relationship. So let's talk about more of what we can do about it. If you're in a relationship where accountability is an issue, how do you start addressing it? The first step is to create a culture of mutual responsibility. Yeah, I like that one. because both partners need to commit to being honest, taking ownership of their actions, and actively listening to one another. The next thing I always recommend is open communication. Y'all know I love my communication. I tell y'all that just about in almost all of my episodes, right? Because it's so important. Because you have to be able to talk honestly about what's going on. Sit down and actually discuss how you both approach accountability. It's important to get on the same page so no one feels like they're carrying the weight of the conversation alone. And when you start this conversation, try to speak from a place of honesty, not blame. For example, rather than saying, "You never take responsibility," try something like, "I feel like we've been avoiding taking responsibility for things, and it's leaving me feeling frustrated and disconnected." And speaking of not blaming, let's talk about I statements. This is a game changer, I promise you. Because instead of pointing fingers and saying, "You always do this," try to focus on how you feel. Say something like, "I felt hurt when this happened," or "I'm feeling frustrated because I don't feel heard in this situation." When you do this, it takes away the defensiveness and opens the door for real dialogue. It's all about owning your own feelings and experiences without accusing your partner. Next, you have to actively work on avoiding defensiveness. Oh my goodness, I know some of y'all then paused the button just now. Did she just say you have to actively work on avoiding defensiveness? Like, how do you do that? Okay. So, when your partner brings up an issue, it's easy to automatically jump to defending yourself, right? I need y'all to get that part because it is. Because we all do it. But if you want to grow and get better at accountability, it's important to resist that urge. Take a breath, listen, and hear what your partner is saying. If they're expressing their feelings or frustrations, that's their reality, not yours. And it's important to respect it before jumping in with your own perspective. Some of y'all missed the mark on that one just now, but I'm going to drive it home, I promise. Another thing that can really help is setting clear expectations with each other. It's important to sit down and have a conversation about what accountability actually looks like in your relationship. What does it mean to take responsibility in both the small things and the big things? This can really help avoid misunderstandings down the line and give both a clear framework for how you want to communicate and be accountable. One that might seem obvious, but is honestly so important here. Admit mistakes quickly. I'm going to say it again for y'all. Admit mistakes quickly. Because the sooner you take responsibility for your actions, the easier it is to mend things and move forward. Think of it this way. The longer you let something fester, the more damage it can do. So apologize when it's needed. And don't wait until the tension is unbearable. And speaking of apologies, make them genuine. Don't just say sorry for the sake of it. Own your actions and show that you really want to change. If there's a pattern of behavior that needs addressing, make it clear that you're committed to doing better. Another huge step is holding space for each other. This one is so important, people. Relationships aren't about just fixing problems instantly. Sometimes you need to give your partner time to process what's been said, but don't let the conversation end there. Always circle back. Make sure you address the issue in full and move forward by identifying a resolution together. And lastly, don't be afraid to seek external help if needed. Sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we can't break the cycle on our own. If you find that you're struggling to practice accountability in your relationship, it might be helpful to talk to either a therapist or a relationship coach who can offer tools and guidance. It's nothing to be afraid of or ashamed of. Therapy and relationship coaching can be an incredible resource for couples who want to learn how to communicate better and take responsibility in healthier ways. All right, now that we've unpacked all the tough stuff, y'all know where I'm about to hit. The red flags, yes, the red flags, the challenges, and the emotional toll of avoiding accountability. Let's talk about something really powerful, which is the healing power of accountability. I know it sounds a bit idealistic, especially when we're used to seeing accountability as something that's hard to confront or uncomfortable to practice. But trust me, accountability is one of the most healing forces in any relationship. When both partners own up to their actions and their impact on each other, something really beautiful happens. Yep, I'm coming back to that vulnerability word, because vulnerability isn't a sign of weakness. It's actually the foundation of true emotional connection. Think about it. When you acknowledge your mistakes, you're essentially saying, I trust you enough to show you my imperfections. And when your partner does the same, they're saying, I trust you enough to be honest, even when it's hard. This mutual act of vulnerability creates a safe space where healing can actually happen. Here's why it works. Accountability fosters trust. I don't think y'all heard me. I'm going to say it again. Here is why it works, people, because accountability fosters trust. Without trust, no relationship can survive. No relationship can exist. But when you take responsibility for your actions, whether they hurt your partner's feelings, cause a misunderstanding, or even led to a bigger conflict, you show that you are reliable and committed to making things right. You're saying, I care enough about you in this relationship to own up to my mistakes. That honesty opens the door to repair. It tells your partner, I'm not here to play games or hide behind excuses. I'm here because I want this relationship to work. And I'm willing to face the tough stuff with you. Some of y'all did not hear me on that one. I think some of y'all caught it though. So let's break it down. Accountability can be a bit like the process of healing a wound. If you have a physical injury, the first thing you need to do is acknowledge the injury itself. You can't heal if you're pretending it doesn't exist, right? It's the same with emotional wounds. The first step in healing is acknowledging that something went wrong, that there's pain, and that it needs attention. Once that's acknowledged, you can start the process of healing by owning your role in it and taking steps to mend the situation. But here's where it gets really interesting. Accountability doesn't just heal the hurt caused by one person's actions. It heals the relationship as a whole. When one partner steps up to take responsibility, it often inspires the other to do the same. It creates a domino effect of honesty, transparency, and emotional intimacy. It's a ripple of healing that spreads throughout the relationship. Think about a situation where one person is constantly avoiding responsibility and the other person feels unheard, unimportant, or even invisible to their partner. That lack of accountability creates emotional distance. It breeds resentment and frustration. But the moment one person admits they were wrong, says they're sorry, and really means it, the emotional temperature in the room changes. Suddenly, the person who felt unheard now feels seen. They feel validated in their feelings. They know that their partner isn't going to dismiss their emotions because they've just shown they're willing to listen, reflect, and be accountable. This mutual accountability not only resolves the immediate issue, but it also strengthens the relationship's emotional foundation. Partners begin to trust each other more deeply. They know they can speak their truth without being dismissed, and they feel confident that their partner will show up to take responsibility when necessary. That's what heals the wounds. But let's be real. Taking accountability doesn't mean it's a magic fix. It does mean all your problems are instantly solved. Accountability is the beginning of healing, but it's not the end. It's the first step toward repair, but it has to be followed up with actions that prove that accountability is more than just words. It requires change and effort. If one partner takes accountability but then repeats the same behaviors without any real effort to change, the healing process gets delayed. Accountability needs to be followed by action, real, tangible changes that demonstrate the commitment to do better. When that happens, the healing power of accountability can be fully realized. Trust is rebuilt at this point. The emotional distance shrinks, and the relationship feels stronger than before because both partners know they are committed to growth, both individually and as a couple. Here's another way to look at it. Forgiveness. Follow me on this one. Forgiveness is often the final piece of the healing process, but it's something that can only happen when both partners are willing to be accountable. If you haven't taken responsibility for your actions, how can your partner forgive you? Without accountability, forgiveness feels empty because it's not attached to any meaningful change. But when you admit your wrongs and demonstrate that you're willing to grow from them, you give your partner the chance to forgive with a genuine heart. This doesn't mean the hurt magically disappears, but it opens up the opportunity for both partners to move forward together. Now, I want to bring in some real world examples of how accountability has transformed relationships. For instance, let's say a couple has been struggling with constant miscommunication. One partner tends to shut down during arguments and the other feels unheard. This pattern leads to frustration on both sides, and they feel like they're stuck in a never-ending cycle. But one day, after a particularly difficult conversation, one partner says, "I see that I've been shutting down and not engaging when we argue. That's unfair to you, and I want to work on it." Just that small admission of responsibility can shift the dynamic, the entire dynamic. Trust me. The partner who was feeling unheard might be taken aback at first, surprised, and even a little emotional that their partner finally acknowledged their role in the situation. But in that moment, the door to healing opens. Now the couple can have an open discussion about the issue, and each person can take responsibility for their part. The walls that were once built between them begin to come down. They have to, right? They realize that they're not the enemy. The problem is the issue that needs fixing, not each other. When accountability is present, there's no longer a need to defend or justify past behavior. You don't need to keep score of who's right or wrong. What's important is the willingness to admit, learn, and grow. It's about putting the relationship before your ego and knowing that both partners deserve respect, honesty, and emotional safety. Here's another example. When one partner has been unfaithful, this one about to be a good one, y'all. This is obviously a huge breach of trust, right? And it's not something that can be easily repaired. But if that partner steps forward and fully owns their actions, admits the hurt they caused, and commits to changing, that accountability becomes the foundation for healing. It doesn't erase the pain, but it allows the couple to begin the difficult process of rebuilding their relationship. Without that accountability, there is no path to forgiveness, and the relationship can't heal. I'm not saying that accountability alone can heal all wounds, especially deep ones like infidelity or significant betrayal. But accountability opens the door to healing. It sets the stage for honest conversations, restoration of trust, and the ability to move forward with a renewed commitment to the relationship. It says, "I recognize my role in the pain you're feeling, and I'm here to do the work to make it right." So if you're struggling with accountability in your relationship, start small. Own your mistakes. Acknowledge how your actions have impacted your partner. Be willing to admit when you're wrong and show your partner that you are ready to grow, both individually and together. This is the kind of accountability that not only heals, but strengthens the bond between you. The healing power of accountability isn't just about making things better in the moment. It's about setting a new standard for honesty, vulnerability, and mutual respect that can carry your relationship through any challenges ahead. Ooh, that was a lot. But y'all know I'm about to hit y'all with some more before we wrap this up. because I feel like we need to dive in some different type of red flags, those warning signs that indicate accountability is a serious issue in your relationship. These signs might not always be immediately obvious, but once you notice them, they can help you recognize that something deeper might be going on. One big red flag is when one partner is constantly shifting blame. This is a huge issue if, no matter the situation, one person refuses to own up to their actions and always finds a way to place the blame on the other partner. If you notice that you're always the one being made to feel like the bad guy in every argument, that's a problem. It's emotionally draining to feel like you're always carrying the weight of responsibility for everything that goes wrong in the relationship. Another sign is when one partner avoids conflict altogether. Instead of addressing issues head on, they deflect or walk away whenever things get heated. They might change the subject, act like everything's fine, or even physically leave the situation. This avoidance leads to unresolved issues piling up, leaving one person feeling unheard and emotionally abandoned. And in the long term, this kind of behavior can leave you feeling like you're not in a partnership at all, but more like a solo actor trying to solve everything on your own. Then there's defensiveness. This one's a big one, y'all. And this is probably one that is familiar to most of us. When you try to bring up an issue, instead of hearing you out, your partner immediately starts defending their actions. Maybe they say, well, I only did that because you, or you always do this, so I had to do that. Defensiveness completely shuts down productive communication. It becomes a pattern of constantly justifying one's actions instead of owning them. This only leads to more frustration because when you're defensive, you're not really addressing the root cause of the problem and nothing gets resolved. And don't get me started on if you've experienced stonewalling, where your partner shuts down completely and gives you the silent treatment. That's another big red flag. This behavior is a form of emotional withdrawal. When one partner disengages and refuses to acknowledge their role in the situation, it creates a toxic dynamic where the issues never get talked through. Stonewalling only adds to the emotional distance between you and your partner, making it harder to reconnect emotionally. Another dangerous red flag is gaslighting. This is when your partner denies or minimizes your feelings to the point where you start to question your own reality. They might say things like, you're overreacting, or you're imagining things, even when you know deep down that you're not. Gaslighting erodes your sense of self and makes it difficult to trust your own perceptions. It's an insidious form of manipulation, and it can leave you feeling disoriented and emotionally unsafe. Now, let's talk about passive-aggressive behavior, shall we? A sneaky red flag that can sometimes fly under the radar. Instead of confronting issues directly, one partner might express their dissatisfaction through indirect actions, subtle comments, or behaviors. It might be things like giving you the silent treatment, making backhanded remarks, or speaking underneath their breath, saying something smart. It's not always obvious in the moment, but over time, this kind of behavior can build up, leaving both partners feeling misunderstood and emotionally frustrated. And another one to keep an eye on is when your partner consistently dismisses your feelings. If every time you express how something made you feel, the response is, you're too sensitive, or it's not a big deal, that's a serious red flag. If your emotions are being invalidated, it creates an environment where it feels impossible to have an honest conversation about accountability. You start to question whether your feelings are important at all, which can make you withdraw emotionally. And then there's the case of inconsistent apologies. This one can be tricky because you might hear the words, "I'm sorry," but the actions don't follow. If your partner apologizes but doesn't make any effort to change the behavior that caused the problem in the first place, It's like putting a band-aid on a wound without really addressing the cause. Apologies should come with an intent to do better. Without that, you're stuck in a cycle of empty promises and nothing ever really gets resolved. Lastly, now this one's an interesting one. I want to add power struggles in conversations to the list. This is a big one that often goes unnoticed until it becomes a pattern. When you and your partner are having a conversation and instead of trying to understand each other's perspectives, the discussion turns into a fight to be right. That's a huge red flag. Power struggles usually arise when both partners are focused on winning the argument rather than resolving the issue. If conversations feel like a competition, or if one partner constantly tries to dominate the conversation or shut down the other, it prevents any real resolution. The relationship starts to feel less like a partnership and more like a battle where both of you are working against each other, not with each other. These red flags are not something to take lightly. If any of these behaviors are happening in your relationship, it's crucial to address them early on. Left unchecked, they can lead to serious emotional harm and prevent the relationship from growing in a healthy way, I promise you. The problem is that avoiding accountability creates a wall between you and your partner. Over time, it becomes harder to even have an honest conversation. According to research from the Gottman Institute, couples who avoid accountability are more likely to enter into negative cycles of conflict, leading to long-term dissatisfaction and eventually the breakdown of your relationship. So the sooner you can recognize these signs and have an honest conversation about them, the better your chances of creating a strong, accountable, and supportive relationship. All right, let's wrap things up, shall we? We've talked about a lot today, but the key takeaway is simple. Accountability is the cornerstone of any healthy relationship. It's not about being perfect, no one is, but it's about being willing to own your actions and make things right when things go wrong. It's about taking a step back, acknowledging the impact you've had on your partner, and being open to growth. That's how you build trust, intimacy, and respect. Remember, accountability doesn't just heal, it empowers. It empowers you to be more vulnerable, to communicate openly, and to strengthen your bond in ways that create a lasting, loving partnership. So I challenge you, my listeners, my couples, to think about your own relationship. Where can you step up and take more responsibility? And where can you encourage your partner to do the same? Because at the end of the day, a relationship that embraces accountability is a relationship that thrives. And if you're feeling stuck, don't worry. This is a journey. Whether you're dating or in a long-term commitment, you can start small. Acknowledge your actions, listen to each other, and work towards a healthier way of relating. And before I go, I want to remind you to subscribe to Heart's Wine from Heart's Distractions on YouTube for exclusive episodes and content. And don't forget to visit my website, www.aliciasdistractions.com, for more resources and updates. Follow us on social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Yep, we're there because you won't want to miss what's coming next. So I want to thank you all for tuning in today. Be sure to take care of each other. And I'll see you next time with another conversation on love, connection, and all the messy, beautiful moments in between. So stay accountable, even showing up to listening to this podcast. Cheers.